Hey Premiere Pros, it's Paul Murphy here, and today we're going to create the opening titles to a horror masterpiece, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Psycho is one of my all-time favorite horror films, and I've always wanted to recreate its opening titles, which were designed by the amazing designer Saul Bass. But I thought I'd add an extra challenge of limiting myself to recreating them in only Premiere Pro, so I can't use After Effects, Illustrator, or Photoshop. I've got to stay within the one application. And what this forced me to do was to come up with a few tricks that I think will be usable in other titles you might be working on, which is why I've included the project file for download, and you can get the details for that in the description. But let's jump straight into it. I have a new sequence open here, and I'll just show you the sequence settings that I'm using. So this is just a standard HD sequence, 1920 by 1080. We're in square pixels and the frame rate is 23976, but you can choose any frame rate you want. And I'm just going to start off by creating some horizontal lines. So I'll go over to my new item button and I'm going to choose black video. These settings will match the settings of my sequence, which is good. So I'll click OK. And then I'll drag this into my sequence. And just to stay nice and organized, I'm going to rename this horizontal lines and click OK. Then I'm going to go over to my effects panel and do a search on the grid effect. There it is. And I'll just drag that onto my clip. And if we go over here to our effect controls panel, I'm going to change the size from option to width and height sliders. For the width, that's the space between the vertical lines in my grid. Now, I don't want any vertical lines. I'm doing horizontal lines. So I'm going to set this to the highest value, which is 4000. For the height, I need to do just a little bit of maths here because I want 15 horizontal lines on screen. So the height will be the height of my sequence divided by 15. So 1080 divided by 15 is 72. And then for the border, this is going to be half the height. So half of 72 is 36. So there you go. Now we have 15 horizontal lines. We do have one vertical line there, but I can just use the anchor to drag this off screen. And this may be a controversial choice, but I'm going to change the color of these lines. So in the original, which was shot in black and white, the lines were in black and white. I'm actually going to change these to like a deep red. So I'll choose a red and I'll set the brightness to 75%. But of course, if you want to be a purist, you're more than welcome to make these gray instead of red. Now let's move on to the transition of these lines moving on and off screen. So for this, I'm going to create a new sequence. I'll go over to my project panel and new item, sequence. Now I have a custom sequence that I've created down here that's standard HD just because I'm sick of every time I open this window, Premiere defaults to one of these DV settings. So I've just created one that's standard HD, and this is just 1920 by 1080 square pixels and the frame rate is 23976. The only change I'm going to make to these settings here is I want the width to be twice the size of a standard HD sequence. And I don't want to have to do the math on that. So I'm just going to click in here and type ×2. And it tells me that it's 3,840 pixels wide. And then down the bottom here where it says sequence name, I'm going to call this horizontal wipe on and click OK. I'll go and grab that black video that we created and drag that onto the sequence, and I'll press my backward slash so I can see all of my sequence. Now you can't actually see this at the moment, but that black video is not filling all of my sequence. If I go over to the wrench and choose transparency grid, you can see it's only filling the middle. So I'm going to select the black video and just scale it up until it fills everything. And then I'll go over to my effects and I want to grab the wipe transition. So there it is down there. And I'm going to drag this to the tail of my clip. Now the default video duration of a transition in my project is 1 second. I'll just double click this to confirm that. Yes, that is right. And you can see all this is doing is starting with that black video and then wiping it to transparent pixels. I actually want this to wipe from the right side of the screen. So with the transition selected, I'll just go over here and choose the right side. So now we start with black and it wipes on from the right. I also want to trim this clip so it's only the transition. So I'll just move my playhead to the start here and press Q, and that will trim everything before the playhead. And so now we have our horizontal wipe on. We just need to create a horizontal wipe off. So to do that, I'm just going to go over to my project panel, select the sequence we've just created, and then duplicate it. So the shortcut to do that is Shift-Command/. I'll rename this horizontal wipe off. and I'll open up this sequence, and I want this to start with transparent pixels and then wipe to black. So I'm just going to select that transition and press Command X or Control X to cut. I'll select the head of this black video clip and press Command V to paste. And so now we have transparent pixels and we go to black. So we've got our horizontal transitions for wiping on and wiping off. Let's add them into our main sequence. And actually, just looking at this now that I've got transparent pixels turned on, I actually want this background here to be black. So I'm going to select our horizontal lines and change the blending mode to normal. And then I'll go and grab our horizontal wipe on sequence and add this to the start. And then I'll just move 5 frames forward and I'll add our horizontal wipe off after that. And I'll just trim the clip underneath to be the same length. So now we just have something that looks like this, which is getting pretty close, but of course all of these lines are the exact same length, and in the original they were all varying lengths and moving at different speeds as well. So we need to randomize the length of these lines. So to do that, I'm going to go up to my effects panel and I'm going to grab the turbulent displace effect and I'm going to drag this onto my transition. I'll go over to my effect controls, and for displacement, I'm going to change this to horizontal displacement. I'm going to turn up the amount, so there's quite a bit of difference between these different lines. And I'm also going to adjust the size, maybe turn this up even more. And you can see this has added variation to our lines, but our lines aren't straight anymore. So to set them back to being straight, I'm just going to add another effect, and that is the mosaic effect, MOSAIC. And I'll drag this onto my clip. And so basically what this is going to do is pixelate our image. So reduce our image down to subdivided rectangles. If I go over here for the horizontal blocks, I want to set this to the maximum, so 4000. But for the vertical blocks, I want to set this to the number of lines we have on screen, which is 15. Now we're really close here. This still doesn't look quite right. They're not solid shapes anymore. For that, we just need to choose sharp colors. And now we have the look that we want. So if I play this back, you can see we've got varying lines moving across the screen. But I do want to tweak this just a little bit because in the original title sequence, all of these lines are moving at different rates from one another. They're not all moving together. So to create that effect, I'm just going to go back into my turbulent displace effect. I'm going to go down to my evolution. I'll move my playhead to the very start and I want to turn on keyframes for evolution. Then I'll move to the last keyframe in my transition and I'm going to set this to 180. And so now we should see these lines are all moving at different speeds across the screen. And the great thing about doing all of that work on this transition here is we can just copy and paste this onto the other transition. So I'm just going to press Command C, select our other transition over here and press Option Command V or Control Alt V on Windows and just paste all of those effects, click OK. And the only change I'm going to make is I'm going to go into the turbulent displace effect down to the evolution options and I'm going to adjust the random seed so that these lines don't look exactly like the other lines. So I'll just increase this till I see something I like, maybe something like that. And now we've animated our lines across the screen. Now let's add some text to our title. So to do this, I'm just going to hold down Command T or Control T on Windows. I've actually already created a text style for my titles, so I'm just going to go into my bins in my project panel and over to styles, and I'm just going to drag this text style onto my layer, and you can see it updates the style. Just to show you what I'm using for this, I'm actually using the original font from the original title sequence, which is News Gothic Standard, and you can actually get this for free off Adobe Fonts. The size is 90, and I'm also just going to make sure that this is perfectly centered in my frame. Now what I need to do is split this layer up into 3 separate layers. So a good thing to do before I do that is to upgrade this graphic to a master graphic. So I'm going to select the layer in my timeline, go up to graphics, upgrade to master graphics. And what that does is that creates a master clip in my project panel. And that means that wherever I use this graphic, if I make an update to it, it's going to update everywhere that graphic is being used. So to intersect this text layer with the grid, all I need to do is go down to my horizontal lines and I'm going to press Command C to copy. I'll go back to my text layer and press Option Command V, and then I'll paste the grid effect. At the moment, it's just put the red lines over the top of my text layer, but if I go over to my effect controls, down here where it says blending mode, I'm going to change this to stencil alpha. And now it's using the grid as like a mask over my text. To create the top layer of my text, I'm just going to duplicate my layer in the timeline. So I'll hold down Option or Alt and click and drag up. I'll select the top layer and then go over to my grid effect and choose invert grid. Now I only want the top third of the text for this layer, so I'll just go back over to my effects and I'll get the crop effect. I'll just drag this onto my top layer and then I'll crop the bottom half. And then I need to create the bottom layer as well, so I'll just move these layers up one track. So I'll hold down Option or Alt and my up key. I'll select just the top layer, hold down Option or Alt to duplicate it and move it to the bottom. And then with that layer selected, I'll invert my crop. So I'll select my crop and move this all the way down to the bottom and then move this halfway down. So now if I turn off these two tracks here, you should see my text layer build on 1/3 at a time. And this is going to allow me to animate these different sections of the text separately. And to do my animation, I'm just going to use a simple push transition. So I'll go up to my effects and search for push. And then I'll add this to my top layer. I'm going to double click the transition and set this to 15 frames and click OK. And you can see that this is pushing in from the left. Actually, I might just turn off my transparency grid there. I actually want this to push on from the right, so it's going in the same direction as the lines. So I'll just go up to my effect controls and select the right side. And then with my transition selected, I'll just press Command C and I'll copy this to the other two layers. And then I'll move my text into position. So I think I'll have the first one come in somewhere around about here. So I'll just move that layer over. I'll just use the Command and left key until I sort of get this to a place that I want it to appear. That looks good. I'll get the bottom layer and probably just put this offset a little bit like this. And for the middle layer, I actually want this to come in from the opposite direction once the lines have cleared. So I'll select that transition again and make sure it's coming in from the left. And now we have something that looks like this. And just to show you why I set this text layer to a master graphic is we've been using new text layer, which is probably not the text that I want to work with. If I wanted to change this text, all I would have to do is select one of these layers and I'll go in and make a change. So the horror classic. And you can see that this has updated all of those other layers and it's kept the animation. So it's just a really quick way to change this as you go. And what we've built here on the timeline is really the basis for building out the entire animation. You just want variation between each transition. And there you go, that's how you create the titles from Psycho using only Premiere Pro. I hope you found this video useful, and if you did, please like and subscribe for more videos like this. And don't forget to download the project file in the description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.